By the summer of 1994, NASCAR had already received more warnings than any sport should need. The garage had spent the previous 16 months watching familiar names disappear. Alan Kulvitsky was killed in an airplane crash in April 1993. Davey Allison died after a helicopter accident that July. Then Daytona arrived in February 1994, and within 3 days practice crashes claimed Neil Bonnet and Rodney Orr. 4 stars were gone in less than a year. The losses had different causes, but together they changed the atmosphere around Winston Cup racing. The garage could feel less like a workplace than a place in mourning. Everyone understood how thin the margin was. What had not changed was the culture. Safety in 1994 was discussed, nothing like it would be a decade later. There was no mandatory Hans device. Safer barriers did not line the walls. Open-face helmets were still common. Restraint systems were far less advanced. And a 3,400-pound stock car carrying roughly 700 horsepower could strike exposed concrete at around 175 miles per hour. At that point, survival depended on the car, the safety crew, circumstance, and a great deal of luck. Drivers knew it. Teams knew it. NASCAR knew racing was dangerous. But acknowledging the full scale of that danger challenged the identity of the sport. Winston Cup rewarded toughness. Drivers were expected to race, not complain. The accepted philosophy was that danger came with the job. Dale Earnhardt captured that attitude when discussion turned to softer walls. He would rather cruise spend 20 minutes cleaning up the mess than cleaning him off the wall. That was the world Ernie Irvan raced in. And on an August morning at Michigan International Speedway, one small decision inside that world nearly killed him. Long before Michigan, Irvan had built a career by refusing to back down. He grew up in California and began racing go-karts in Salinas at 9 years old. By 15, he had won a state championship. At 16, he moved into stock cars and won his first asphalt race. Driving was never the problem. Finding a path in a NASCAR was. In 1982, Irvan loaded everything he owned into a pickup truck, attached a homemade trailer, put together about $700 in cash, and headed east for Charlotte, North Carolina. He was a California outsider trying to enter a sport still rooted heavily in Southern racing families, established teams, and relationships built over generations. Nobody was waiting to give him a Winston Cup ride, so he survived however he could. He welded grandstand seats at Charlotte Motor Speedway to pay rent. He washed cars. He built race cars with his friend Mark Reno. He accepted whatever racing opportunities appeared and kept trying to turn speed into a career. His Winston Cup debut finally came in 1987 in a car sponsored by Dale Earnhardt Chevrolet. It ended with an overheated engine. A handful of additional starts with different teams followed, but nothing became permanent. In 1988 and 1989, Irvan drove for Dick Barr and showed flashes of what he could do, yet the equipment and financing were not strong enough to turn those flashes into sustained results. The beginning of 1990 looked no better. After 3 races with Juni Domleve, sponsorship disappeared. Irvan began wondering whether his Cup career was finished almost before it had properly started. Then another driver's frustration opened a door. Phil Parsons, driving for Mortimer McClure Motorsports, became so unhappy with the car during a race weekend he said he was going to the infield care center and did not return. Team owner Larry McClure suddenly needed someone to drive. He called Irvan. At Atlanta in March 1990, Irvan started 30th in Mortimer McClure's yellow number 4 Oldsmobile. He finished 3rd. It was his first Winston Cup top 5 and the breakthrough he had spent years chasing. It also introduced the contradiction that would define the early part of his career. Ernie Irvan was fast enough to belong at the front. He was also aggressive enough to make nearly everyone around him nervous. 2 weeks after Atlanta, Darlington provided the clearest example. Irvan was roughly 10 laps down when a restart put him near leader Ken Schrader. Instead of simply riding out the situation, Irvan raced Schrader hard, got sideways, made contact, and triggered a major accident. Neil Bonnet was among the drivers caught in it. Bonnet suffered severe head injuries and amnesia and was airlifted to a hospital. His full-time driving career was effectively over. The garage's reaction to Irvan was immediate and vicious. Sterling Marlin believed he was in over his head. Darrell Waltrip called the move plainly stupid and suggested that he and Dale Earnhardt ought to take Irvan behind the garage for a man-to-man conversation. A nickname followed him, Swervin' Irvan. The reputation stuck even as the victories began to come. At Talladega in May 1991, Irvan was buried in a pack traveling above 190 miles per hour when a crash scattered 12 cars across the backstretch. Kyle Petty broke his leg and missed 11 races. Irvan insisted he had done nothing wrong and had simply been trapped in the middle. Few competitors were interested in hearing it. Then came another incident at Pocono in July involving Hutch Strickland. By then, Irvan could no longer ignore what was happening around him. The drinking, the booze during driver introductions, the nickname, and the hostility from other drivers were becoming part of his identity. He began talking with veterans such as Darrell Waltrip and Richard Petty. Their advice was uncomfortable but simple. Oh, what had happened? Ask for forgiveness. Otherwise, the rest of the garage might never trust him. At the next Talladega event in July 1991, Irvan stood before the drivers' meeting and did something that did not fit the image everyone had built around him. He apologized. The meeting was carried live on television, an unusual occurrence, and it later emerged that the session had been televised specifically so Irvan's apology would be seen. He acknowledged that many drivers had lost respect for him and said that hurt. He admitted he had sometimes driven too aggressively, promised to become more patient, and said he wanted to earn back the respect of the people he raced against. The room listened. Mark Martin, who would eventually become one of Irvan's closest friends, later admitted that during the worst of 1991, Irvan had been one of his least favorite people in the garage. The apology did not erase the past, but it changed the direction of Irvan's career. Respect began returning, and the results kept coming. In February 1991, Irvan won the Daytona 500, stock car racing's biggest event. Only 4 years earlier, he had watched the race on a borrowed black and white television while washing cars and trying to make rent. Now, he was standing in Daytona's victory lane. He won twice that season, finished 5th in the championship, and by 1993 had earned more than $1 million. The outsider had become a Winston Cup star. Then tragedy created another turning point. Davey Allison died following his helicopter crash at Talladega in July 1993. Robert Yates needed someone to take over Allison's number 28 Texaco Avalon Ford. Yates wanted Irvan. Morgan McClure did not want to release him. The disagreement became a lawsuit before the two sides finally reached an arrangement. Irvan joined Robert Yates racing and debuted in a number 28 at the Southern 500 at Darlington. The fit was immediate. He won 2 of his first 9 races with the organization. His first victory with Yates came at Martinsville and was dedicated to Allison. At Charlotte, Irvan led all but 6 laps on the way to another win. By 1994, Robert Yates Racing had assembled one of the strongest combinations in NASCAR. Irvan drove the car. Larry McReynolds made the calls from the pit box. Doug Yates, Robert's son, was heavily involved in the engine program. Ford provided factory support. The chemistry worked almost immediately. Doug Yates later described it as instant speed and instant success. In his view, Irvan was exactly the driver the number 28 Texaco Havoline Ford needed after Allison. The statistics supported him. Through the first 20 races of a 1994 Winston Cup season, Irvan had been either first or second in the championship standings every single week. He had 3 victories: Richmond, Atlanta, and Sonoma. He had 13 top 5 finishes and 20 starts. He had 5 poles. Dale Earnhardt also had 3 wins. And as the series headed to Michigan in August, only 27 points separated them. Nobody else was truly in the same fight. The championship had become Earnhardt versus Irvan. Even more remarkable, Irvan would end the year having led more miles than any other driver despite competing in only 20 of the scheduled 31 races. McReynolds later remembered the 1994 team as being as prepared to win a championship as any group he had ever worked with. They had speed, they had consistency, they had a driver operating at the height of his ability. McReynolds would later estimate that without what happened next, Irvan might have finished his career with 30 or 40 Cup victories instead of 15. 1 week before Michigan, NASCAR held the inaugural Brickyard 400 at Indianapolis. Irvan nearly won it. With 5 laps remaining, he was leading when a piece of aluminum from his own car cut a tire. He had to pit, lost a lap, and watched the victory disappear. Years later, he still remembered it as the race that got away. There was no time to dwell on it. Michigan was next. On Friday night of the race weekend, Irvan, Doug Yates, Robert Yates, and her wife sat inside the team's motorhome playing Monopoly. Doug remembered Irvan making side deals, stacking up money, and cheating badly enough to make everyone laugh years later. It was an ordinary night during an extraordinary season. Saturday would be different. Irvan qualified 19th for Sunday's race. The starting position was not ideal, but it was manageable. More concerning was the car itself. The handling was not right. Early Saturday morning, during the first practice session at approximately 8:40, conditions were good. The sky was hazy, temperatures were in the low 70s, and Michigan International Speedway was fast. Very fast. The 2-mile oval allowed drivers to carry roughly 170 miles per hour through the turns, with concrete walls waiting outside the racing surface. McReynolds sent Irvan out for a 10-lap run to evaluate the car. Almost immediately, the problem became obvious. The Ford was tight. In the corners, they wanted to push toward the wall rather than rotate the way Irvan needed. McReynolds had seen enough. He radioed his driver and told him to bring the car back. The team needed to make adjustments. Irvan answered with a request. Only make a couple more. Years later, he would return to that exchange again and again. He knew exactly what McReynolds had said. He knew the car needed work, and he knew that his own decision to stay out was one of those moments he wished he could change. He continued around the track. Then, entering turn 2, the right front tire failed. What followed took only a few seconds. Irvan was traveling somewhere between roughly 170 and 176 miles per hour. Ted Musgrave was about 10 car lengths behind him and saw the beginning of the crash. He watched the right front corner of the number 28 dip as though the tire had gone down. Irvan hit the brakes. The car moved slightly left, but with the right front tire flat, it would not turn properly. It went almost straight toward the wall. The right front corner struck first. The Ford slammed into the concrete and remained against the barrier. On the radio, McReynolds initially had no idea that the crash car was his. He told Irvan that the caution was out. Then someone on the crew realized what had happened. McReynolds and team members commandeered the pace car and rushed toward turn 2, but officials would not allow them near the wreck. The reason was immediately clear. Irvan was unconscious. Blood was coming from his mouth and nose. Both lungs had collapsed and were badly damaged. He was aspirating blood. The car was destroyed around him, and a safety crew was fighting to reach him. Under ordinary circumstances, the time required to extract him might have been fatal. But that morning, chance placed exactly the right person near turn 2. Dr. John Mayno, a trauma surgeon from Ann Arbor, was volunteering with the local rescue squad at the Speedway. He reached the car and understood that Irvan's airway had become the immediate problem. Without oxygen, there would be no time to wait for a hospital. Irvan needed an emergency airway. The rescue team had a tracheotomy kit. It did not have the blade Mayno needed, so he used a pocket knife. Mayno made an incision roughly half an inch long below Irvan's Adam's apple, inserted a tube, connected a pad, and manually forced air into his lungs. It was the kind of intervention in which seconds mattered more than elegance. Mayno later described operating largely on adrenaline and basic trauma priorities: airway, breathing, circulation, then neurological condition. In 11 years, he had performed the tracheotomy only twice before. He has not performed one since. The rescue operation continued around him. It took approximately 8 minutes to cut Irvan out of the car. 6 doctors worked in pairs, calling out injuries as they identified them. 23 minutes after the impact, Irvan was on a stretcher and being loaded into a helicopter. Mayno made another crucial decision. Instead of sending the helicopter to the infield hospital, he had it land at the crash scene. That saved time Irvan did not have. Later, Irvan could only marvel at the coincidence. A trauma doctor had happened to be stationed near the exact corner where he crashed. The helicopter carried him to St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in Ann Arbor, roughly 50 miles away. At the Speedway, his wife Kim knew almost nothing. She had been in the motorhome when the crash occurred. What frightened her most was that nobody would tell her whether her husband was alive. Robert Yates received even worse information. An emergency worker told him Irvan had not made it. At the hospital, Kim and Yates finally learned that he was alive. Then doctors gave them another number. Irvan had approximately a 10% chance of surviving the night. Dr. Errol Erlinson, the trauma surgeon on duty, addressed the media that afternoon. Irvan was not alert. He had severe injuries affecting two major organ systems. There was a basilar skull fracture. His entire brain, including the brainstem, was massively swollen. Both lungs had collapsed and suffered severe bruising. There were soft tissue injuries to his face, head, and neck. There was internal bleeding. He was on a ventilator. Doctors were not prepared to offer a meaningful prognosis. For the next 5 days, Kim Irvan barely left his side. She later said she slept a total of about 9 hours, often in a chair with her head resting against Ernie's bed. She begged and pleaded with God. The first 48 hours were especially uncertain. Outside the hospital, NASCAR confronted another nightmare. For drivers had already died in a little more than a year. Now another star was fighting for his life. Dale Jarrett remembered the garage becoming eerily quiet when serious accident happened. This was one of those times. Irvan survived the first night. Then he survived the second. Slowly, the situation changed. By early September, his condition had been upgraded to fair and he had been removed from the ventilator. He was transferred to the Charlotte Institute of Rehabilitation. In October, he returned publicly to Charlotte Motor Speedway before the Mellow Yellow 500 and spoke to the fans. By December, he attended the NASCAR banquet at the Waldorf Astoria. The damage was still visible. Nerve injuries had left him with double vision, and he wore a patch over his left eye. But he was alive. More than that, he intended to race again. Dr. James McDevitt, medical director at the Charlotte Rehabilitation Facility, was struck by the recovery. He said Irvan had largely escaped the cognitive, emotional, and fatigue problems often associated with neurological injuries of that severity. McDevitt had seen very few patients recover so well from comparable trauma. By mid-October, Irvan's lungs had completely healed. Formal physical rehabilitation ended, and he was cleared for normal gym workouts. The next question was whether a man who had nearly died in a race car could become a race driver again. In March 1995, Irvan took an official step toward answering it. At Darlington, he tested a Busch Series car. He still wore the eye patch. His lap times were competitive. On September 16, 1995, NASCAR cleared him to race. His return came October 1st at North Wilkesboro. Rather than immediately reclaiming the number 28, Irvan drove the number 88 Texaco line Ford alongside Dale Jarrett, who had taken over the 28 during Irvan's recovery. Irvan qualified 7th. By lap 47, he was 3rd. On lap 125, he took the lead. He stayed there for 31 laps and finished 6th on a lead lap. Years later, Irvan considered North Wilkesboro one of the best races of his life. Not because he had raced with an eye patch. Not because 6th place was an extraordinary result on paper. It mattered because he was racing again. He had returned to the thing he loved. Robert Yates had persuaded NASCAR officials that Irvan could compete safely despite the eye patch. Doug Yates called him one of the most talented and toughest people he had ever known. In 1996, Irvan returned to the number 28 full-time, while Jarrett remained his teammate in the 88. Irvan won twice, at New Hampshire and Richmond. He recorded 12 top 5s and 16 top 10s, finished 10th in the championship, and earned a career-best $1.67 million. At Martinsville, he started 34th and finished 2nd to Rusty Wallace despite suffering dehydration severe enough to require intravenous fluids afterward. Mick Reynolds summed up the team's approach simply. They kept plugging away, and so did Ernie. Then came June 1997, Michigan International Speedway. The same track, the same place where 3 years earlier, Irvan had almost died. He started 20th in the Miller 400 and gradually moved forward. 4 cars controlled much of the afternoon. Ted Musgrave led early. Bill Elliott and Mark Martin exchanged the lead through the middle stages. With roughly 40 laps remaining, Irvan joined the fight. He moved into first place for the first time on lap 162, shortly before the final cycle of green flag pit stops. Robert Yates Racing executed the decisive stop. With about 25 laps left, Irvan took 2 tires and gained time. Elliott's 2-tire stop cost him ground. Musgrave's team attempted to stretch its run and build a gap before pitting. The strategy did not work. With 21 laps remaining, Musgrave exited pit road and Irvan reclaimed the lead. The advantage created during the stops was enough. Irvan drove to the victory. It was his 15th Winston Cup win. It would also be his last. With roughly 10 laps remaining, he began crying inside the car. Kim was crying in the stands. In victory lane, Irvan told CBS Sports that he had never known whether he would even be able to race at Michigan again, much less win there. Driving with tears in his eyes had been difficult, but they were not tears of sadness. For Dud Yates, the 1997 Michigan victory finally closed the chapter opened by the crash in 1994. It represented the work, the recovery, Irvan's will to live, and his determination to compete again. It also gave Robert Yates and the rest of the team a measure of closure at the place associated with one of the worst days of their lives. The comeback had proven something beyond survival. Irvan could still win. His career, however, had not escaped the consequences of head trauma. In 1998, he moved to MB2 Motorsports to drive the number 36 Skittles Pontiac. Another hard crash at Talladega forced him to miss the final 3 races of the season. He returned in 1999, but concussion symptoms from the previous year continued to trouble him. Then the calendar produced an almost impossible coincidence. August 20th, 1999, exactly 5 years after the crash that nearly killed him, Irvan was back at Michigan, this time qualifying for a Busch Series race. Exiting turn 4, he lost control and hit the wall. He was unconscious when rescuers reached him. Dr. John Mano treated him again, although this time the treatment took place in the infield hospital rather than inside a destroyed race car. The injuries were less severe than in 1994, a mild head injury and a bruised lung, but they were enough. 2 weeks later, on September 3rd, Irvan sat before reporters in Darlington, South Carolina. Kim was beside him. Their children, Jordan and Jared, were there as well. Irvan announced his retirement. He explained that he wanted to prevent another incident while he still had a family to support. The final Winston Cup numbers told the story of what he had accomplished despite everything. 313 starts, 15 victories, 22 poles, 68 top 5 finishes, 124 top 10s, and more than $11 million in career earnings. NASCAR had named him one of its 50 greatest drivers in 1998. He would later be selected among the sport's 75 greatest drivers. Yet Irvan's story also exposes something uncomfortable about NASCAR in the 1990s. His 1994 crash did not trigger the safety revolution that, in retrospect, it seemed to demand. NASCAR did not respond by mandating head and neck restraints. Safer barriers did not subtly appear. Full-face helmets did not become compulsory. Seatbelt mounting standards were not transformed overnight. There was no immediate safety-focused research and development center. The sport mourned. They continued racing largely as it had before. The reckoning arrived years later. On the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, Dale Earnhardt died from a basilar skull fracture, the same type of injury that had nearly killed Irvan. By then, the pattern had become impossible to overlook. Adam Petty had died in May 2000. Kenny Irwin Jr. died in July. Tony Roper died in October. All suffered the same fatal injury. 4 drivers died in 9 months from basilar skull fractures. Yet NASCAR did not mandate head and neck restraints until October 2001. Blaze Alexander's death from a basilar skull fracture at Charlotte added still more urgency. After Earnhardt, the sport finally moved with a speed that earlier tragedies had failed to produce. Safer barriers began appearing. In 2002, full-face helmets became mandatory. Seat technology improved. Belt mounting standards became stricter. Crash data recorders were introduced. Later, The car of tomorrow moved the driver's seating position farther toward the center of the cockpit. The tools and ideas that could reduce the consequences of violent impacts had existed in various forms before Earnhardt's death. What changed was the willingness to require them. Losing a 7-time champion, the most recognizable driver in NASCAR, on live television during the sport's biggest race, made continued resistance impossible. That is why it would be inaccurate to say Ernie Irvan's Michigan crash changed NASCAR's safety by itself. It did not. It became one more warning in a sequence of warnings the sport was slow to act upon. Irvan survived for reasons that were almost frighteningly specific. A trauma surgeon happened to be volunteering near the corner where he crashed. That surgeon had the knowledge to create an emergency airway and, when the proper blade was unavailable, used a pocket knife. A helicopter was brought directly to the crash scene rather than forcing rescuers to transport Irvan first to the infield hospital. His age, physical condition, treatment, and luck all mattered. Doctors gave him roughly a 10% chance to survive the first night. He survived anyway. Then he returned to racing with impaired vision. Then he won again at the track that had nearly killed him. That is the part of the story that belongs to Irvan alone. But the crash itself belongs to a larger history. It shows how dangerous Winston Cup racing remained in 1994, how much responsibility drivers accepted as normal, and how easily one routine practice run could become a catastrophe. It also came down to a decision so small that it would have been forgotten had nothing happened. The crew chief said the car needed work. The driver asked for a couple more laps. One tire failed. 3 seconds at roughly 170 miles per hour nearly ended a life and almost certainly changed a championship. There is no reason to romanticize what happened that morning. It was not a golden age of safety. It was an era in which the sport repeatedly came frighteningly close to losing its stars, and sometimes did. What followed, however, gave Irvan's story another meaning: recovery, a second chance. The refusal to allow one impact to define everything afterward. In 2004, Irvan founded the Race to Safety Foundation to promote awareness of head injuries. In retirement, he helped his son Jared race late models in Florida. He retained a lifetime NASCAR pass, though he eventually watched most races from home. For the people around him, Michigan never completely disappeared. Larry McReynolds continued to remember the radio call telling Irvan to bring the car in and the possibility that everything might have been different if the driver had listened. Doug and Robert Yates remembered another Michigan afternoon, the 1997 victory that gave the team some closure. And Irvan was left with both versions of the track: the corner where his career nearly ended, and a victory lane where he proved it had not. The story of August 1994 can therefore be reduced to a few brutal details. One car that was not handled correctly, one request to stay out a little longer, one failed right front tire, one concrete wall, one trauma surgeon in exactly the right place, and one driver who, against 10% odds, lived long enough to return. Ernie Irvan lost the championship he had been fighting for. His career never became the 30 or 40-win career Larry McReynolds believed it might have been. But the crash did not get the final word. 3 years later, Irvan came back to Michigan and won. 5 years after the accident, another crash finally convinced him that survival had already given him enough second chances. That is what makes the story larger than a single wreck. It is not simply about the morning Ernie Irvan almost died. It is about a sport that had not yet learned how much preventable risk it was willing to accept. A driver whose greatest strength could also become his greatest vulnerability in the few seconds that separated a championship season from a fight to stay alive.